They told her it was just scrap metal. A forgotten Cold War-era cargo plane rotting in a field, worth more in parts than whole. But when Kara Jensen cracked open the rusty fuselage and stepped inside, what she discovered wasn't junk, it was a sealed cache hidden for decades, containing something so unexpected, it would draw the attention of historians, engineers, and the military itself. Before we dive in, tell us where you're watching from. We love seeing how far these stories travel. And if tales of discovery, forgotten machines, and hidden history spark something in you, make sure to hit that subscribe button. Because tomorrow's story, let's just say it takes things even deeper. The listing didn't even have a title, just a blurry photo, a lot number, and 6 words. Decommissioned USAF cargo hull. As is. The picture showed the tail end of an aircraft, slouched in tall grass, its faded star insignia barely visible through decades of rust and weathering. Most buyers skipped over it without a second glance, too big to haul, too broken to fix, and definitely not worth the risk. But Kara Jensen stopped scrolling. She was used to odd finds. Her small-town garage had seen everything from sunken speedboats to tractors wrapped in chicken wire. But something about that plane struck her, the loneliness of it, the kind of loneliness that matched her own. She clicked through the rest of the auction listing. No interior photos, no service history, no guarantees. Just coordinates outside an old firebreak line 2 counties over, and a bolded line at the bottom. Buyer responsible for removal within 14 days. Kara leaned back in her chair, tapping her thumbnail against a chipped mug. It wasn't the smartest idea. She barely had enough in her savings to buy the rotors she needed for a customer's stalled Chevy. But something about that hulking carcass of aluminum and rivets stirred something deep inside her. Something mechanical, yes, but also emotional. Like recognition. By the next morning, she had wired $800 to a local salvage broker and borrowed a flatbed trailer from a guy who owed her a favor. She didn't tell anyone where she was going, not because she was hiding it, but because no one would understand. Her neighbors thought she was already too far gone, fixing up machines instead of fixing up her life. Let them talk. The field was a 4-hour drive past farmland, oil rigs and empty motels. When she finally pulled off the gravel road, the plane looked even worse than the photo. A massive fuselage, half-eaten by weeds and time. The paint was blistered. Sections of hull had buckled in the Sunday. It looked like a whale carcass left to rot. She stepped out slowly, letting the silence press against her ears. No birds, no wind. Just that long, heavy body of metal stretching toward the tree line. She walked the length of it, running her fingers along its side. The skin of the plane was warm from the sun, rough beneath her calloused hands. Some of the rivets were missing, others bulged like swollen knuckles. But the structure, the bones still held. She found the cargo door halfway open, stuck in place by rust and saplings. Inside, dust motes danced in golden light. Boxes, tarps. Old equipment stacked, and long forgotten. She pulled her gloves tighter and stepped in. Whatever this plane had been, it wasn't done speaking yet. Kara didn't sleep much the night after seeing the plane. She kept replaying it all in her head, the way the light filtered through the broken fuselage. The strange order to the stacked crates. The silence that didn't feel empty but watchful. Most salvage sites were chaos, leftover parts, animals nesting where they pleased, decay that didn't care what it swallowed. But this plane felt paused. Like someone had left in a hurry and never came back. She sat at her workbench long after the sun went down, oil under her nails, an uneaten sandwich by her elbow. The logistics were impossible. The plane's wings had been removed long ago, probably scavenged for aluminum. The fuselage alone was massive, too wide for most roads, too long for most trailers. But she didn't care about moving it. She cared about what was inside. Early the next morning, Kara made a call to her friend Lyle, who owned a scrapyard and occasionally forgot to report certain sales to the local records office. He owed her a favor too, actually, and after she offered to fix the differential on his wife's vintage Bronco, He agreed to haul the fuselage to the back lot behind her shop. "Don't expect me to help unload that rust coffin," he muttered over the phone. "But I'll get it there in one piece." It took 2 days, 3 straps, a farm tractor, and a healthy amount of profanity. But by the end of it, the plane sat perched like a fallen giant at the edge of Kara's property. The neighbors peeked over their fences, whispered, speculated. One old man across the street made a comment about her collecting junk for the apocalypse. Kara just nodded and went back to work. She set up floodlights and power cords, cleared a path through the wild grass that had overtaken the back lot, and positioned sawhorses as makeshift steps into the side bay. The smell inside the plane hadn't changed, still dry, metallic, and faintly electrical, like something had once buzzed here, something that wasn't entirely mechanical. She began inventorying what she could see. Some of the crates were labeled, but the stenciled markings were faded, and cryptic numbers and abbreviations that didn't match any standard military codebooks she had access to. One box simply read, EB-70, 1 vertical bar, do not open in field conditions. That one she left alone. She found ropes, sealed drums, tarp-wrapped bundles, and what looked like a portable generator locked in a steel cage. But the oddest thing was a heavy steel bulkhead toward the nose of the plane. Unlike the rest of the hollowed-out interior, this section was sealed, riveted shut from the outside. No door, no latch, just smooth steel and a faint hum when she pressed her ear to it. Whatever was behind it, someone went out of their way to keep it hidden. And Kara? She was going to find out why. Word spreads fast in a town like Elbridge, especially when a rusted military cargo plane shows up in someone's backyard. By the 3rd day, locals had started dropping by Kara's shop under the guise of oil changes and brake pad questions. In truth, they just wanted a look. The plane loomed behind the garage like a sleeping leviathan, its faded insignia half swallowed by rust, its belly yawning open beneath a tower of crates no one could identify. Some people chuckled. Others muttered warnings. A few looked nervous, like Kara had dug up something that should have stayed buried. "You know what they say about those old birds," said Walt, the retired mechanic, who came by every Wednesday for coffee and gossip. He took a long sip from his thermos. Some of them went out on missions and never came back right. Kara raised an eyebrow. "You mean, like, haunted?" Walt shrugged. "Not ghosts, just strange. Planes flying with no flight logs, crews who never spoke again, whole squadrons erased from base records. That one there?" He nodded toward the fuselage. "I'd bet my left foot it flew for black budget stuff. Off the books. One-way tickets." She half laughed. "And you're just now telling me this? You didn't ask." He left shortly after, but the story clung to her, like smoke from a fire she couldn't see. That night, she sat on a stool inside the cargo bay with a flashlight and a notebook, scribbling anything she could decipher from the markings. She traced outlines of crates with gloved fingers, documenting labels, measurements, weight estimates. Most of it didn't make sense. A few had Cold War-style nomenclature, but none lined up with official inventory standards, and the sealed bulkhead remained a quiet, unmoving presence. She knocked on it once. The sound echoed back wrong. Not hollow, not solid, just off, as if the metal behind it didn't want to be understood. Later, when the wind picked up, the plane made noises, soft creaks and groans like it was settling into place or remembering how to breathe. A loose panel clattered once and made her jump, and when she turned toward it, her flashlight caught something scrawled in chalk just above the inner wing spar. "Do not trust the inventory." Kara froze. She reached up and touched the letters. The chalk was old, but untouched by rain. The space had been sealed for decades, yet the warning felt fresh, intentional, like someone wanted to leave a breadcrumb behind. She sat down, back against the crate labeled EB-71, and tried to calm the thrum in her chest. She'd pulled carburetors out of frozen engines, rewired lifeboats, and rebuilt a diesel motor from scratch in a thunderstorm. But none of it felt like this. This wasn't restoration. This was excavation. and whatever secrets were welded into this plain steel bones they hadn't forgotten how to whisper. The sealed bulkhead wasn't just welded shut. It was overbuilt. Kara stared at the plate for the third morning in a row, kneeling beside a spill of light from her overhead floodlamps. There were no visible hinges, no seams suggesting a door, just thick brushed steel set into the curve of the fuselage like a vault. Her magnet clung to it with surprising strength. When she traced along the perimeter with a small pry tool, the edges sparked not from friction, but from resistance. As if the metal itself didn't want to be opened. She stepped back and exhaled slowly. This wasn't a field modification. This was engineered with purpose, precision, and paranoia. She circled back to the crates. EB 71. Do not open in field conditions. One word echoed louder than the rest. Field. That suggested there were non-field conditions. Labs, maybe. Testing zones. Places this crate wasn't supposed to be opened except under very specific circumstances. She ran her gloved hand along its edge and felt the cold bite of bolted steel. No latches, no simple locks. Whatever was inside hadn't seen daylight since the plane was sealed, and it was heavier than it looked. She brought in a thermal gun. The crate was cold, unnaturally so. Even with the sun baking down on the fuselage for hours, the temperature difference between the box and the air around it held steady, almost regulated. That same eerie chill clung faintly to the bulkhead wall. Something was connected. Kara fetched her rotary saw by dusk. She wasn't stupid. She wasn't going to tear straight into a mystery crate without knowing if it was chemical, electrical, or worse. But the bulkhead, she couldn't stop thinking about it. If this was a vault, maybe the weakest point wasn't in the center, but along the welds. She marked 4 precise points on the edge. Sparks flew as the cutting wheel kissed the metal, the scent of scorched steel hitting the air like fireworks in a graveyard. The sound was deafening inside the narrow space, but she didn't stop. After 45 minutes, her hands were shaking. Sweat dripped into her gloves. Her blade was dull. But the final seam cracked with a sharp metallic sigh. The panel shifted. Just slightly less than an inch, but enough to let a thin line of pressurized air hiss outward, like a long-held breath finally escaping. Kara dropped her tools and stepped back, heart hammering. The interior was pitch black. No immediate machinery, no lights. Just a void of stale air and the sense that something inside had waited. She retrieved her flashlight, leveled it toward the seam, and pried the panel open. It moved reluctantly, but it moved. Beyond it was a narrow corridor, not part of the original plane design. This was built in, reinforced, paneled with black composite, lined with brackets, and ending in a sealed chamber. At the center, half shrouded in canvas, was a structure the size of a motorcycle engine, only it didn't look like any engine she'd ever seen. It pulsed, faintly, as if remembering how. Kara stood at the edge of the narrow corridor, the beam of her flashlight trembling slightly in her hand. The object inside the sealed chamber wasn't glowing, exactly. It pulsed with a faint bioluminescent sheen, more like the last heartbeat of a dying star than any electrical hum she recognized. Even from 6 feet away, the air felt denser, not warmer or colder, just heavier. She took a cautious step forward. The floor beneath her boots gave off a hollow clunk, not aluminum, some kind of composite plating. She reached out and touched the wall with her free hand. Smooth, layered, cool. Whoever installed this chamber had resources and intent. This wasn't a random stash. It was a hidden room, custom-built, buried inside an aircraft no one was supposed to find. She crouched by the machine and lifted a corner of the canvas. Beneath was a tangle of alloy piping and ribbed cables feeding into a dark metallic housing. Her fingers skimmed a recessed plate, etched with barely legible characters. Embler 1. She frowned. EMBLR? It wasn't a military designation she recognized. She turned to retrieve her phone, intent on snapping photos. But the second she clicked the shutter, the device buzzed, not the usual soft haptic, but a violent shudder. The screen flickered, then went black. Dead. Seriously? She muttered, pressing the power button. Nothing. She turned off the flashlight and clicked it back on. Same. Flicker. Buzz. Dim. As if the air itself was interfering. Kara backed out, heart racing faster than she liked. Once outside the corridor, both devices stabilized. The flashlight burned bright again. Her phone rebooted. She sat on a crate near the cargo door and stared out into the dusk, trying to wrap her mind around what she'd just seen. A device, sealed in composite walls, buried in a decommissioned aircraft, still humming like it had a purpose. Why? Back inside the main bay, she returned to the other crates. She had avoided them until now, afraid of triggering something unstable. But after what she saw inside that sealed chamber, she needed answers context. She picked one at random, a smaller one near the back, marked E.M.L., divided by case 2. A screwdriver popped the old latches free. Inside, layers of foam cradled several strange objects, tubes, metallic sheets, and at the very bottom, a notebook. Paper, faded and brittle, handwritten in dense black ink. She flipped through it carefully. Schematics. Notes. Not in military shorthand, but personal observation. Someone had written this in the field, recording tests, failures, warnings. She turned to the first page. If you're reading this, I assume the plane was never recovered. We were told to seal it and scatter. Whatever's in that device, it wasn't finished, but it wasn't dead either. Do not attempt activation. If it wakes up, so do the questions we were told never to ask. Kara stared at the page, the pulsing glow still behind her eyes. This wasn't salvage. This was a secret no one wanted found. The notebook was brittle at the edges, corners curled like dried leaves, and bound with wire instead of glue field-made, not factory-issued. Kara turned each page like it might disintegrate if she breathed too hard. The ink had bled in places, but the handwriting was surprisingly clean, purposeful. Someone had written these words knowing they mattered. The entries weren't dated in full, only labeled by month and year. July 1949. August 1949. November 1949. Cold War territory. The first entry made her pause. Device arrived at Site 9 under heavy cover. 4 guards, no briefing. I asked if this was nuclear. Was told, it's colder than that. I don't know what that means, but none of us are sleeping well. Kara read on, her eyes narrowing. The author initials, M.D.H., wrote, with a mix of technical knowledge and personal dread. The early pages discussed containment protocols, thermal anomalies, power signatures that didn't decay. Terms like closed-loop resonance and non-Euclidean telemetry popped up again and again, words that felt more theoretical physics than aeronautical engineering. But it was the tone that caught her less report, more warning. This isn't propulsion. It's not energy storage. It's something else. It reacts. It remembers. I touched the casing with bare hands and had dreams for 3 days. Not nightmares, but memories. Not mine. Kara blinked. She flipped forward. By September 1949, the tone had shifted entirely. The entries were erratic, sentences bleeding into diagrams, some crossed out violently, others written in all caps. Burns at 22C. Language is in the fields. Do not bring it near magnetic north. She stopped. A photo was tucked between 2 pages. A black and white Polaroid, slightly warped. It showed a group of 5 men in coveralls standing beside what looked like the engine she found. Only it was glowing brighter, cables snaked across the concrete, and 2 of the men had goggles lowered like welders. A 6th man stood apart in military dress, face blurred from motion. Kara flipped it over. In faded pencil, first test, Site 9. Failure rate, 82%. 1 subject, unaccounted. She let the notebook rest on her lap and exhaled. If this was real, If this device had been built and tested in the late 42nds, then it predated most modern propulsion concepts by decades. But the way it was described, the way it was buried, this wasn't just advanced tech. It was dangerous, unstable, and likely classified. She looked back at the sealed chamber, the faint hum still pulsing behind the bulkhead. Then she realized something else. The plane, the design, the layout. It wasn't built around the engine had been built inside the plane, embedded like a seed. This wasn't transport. This wasn't containment. It was integration. They were trying to make the plane part of the device, or the device part of the plane. And then they abandoned it. Kara stood up, slowly, the notebook pressed against her chest. She didn't know what EMBLR stood for yet, but whatever it was, it didn't start with her, and it definitely wasn't over. Kara spent the next 2 days buried in research. She locked the cargo bay at night and kept the journal under her pillow. The words haunted her not with fear, but with a gnawing curiosity that wouldn't let go. Project Emberlight. It was buried beneath the initials EMBLR, like a ghost under frost. She started with public databases, declassified missions, black budget expenditures, Cold War era experiments. Nothing. No official record. No technical papers. The name didn't exist. Then she dove into forums, military historians, amateur archivists, conspiracy hunters, the kinds of places where half the threads were noise, but every once in a while, a whisper of truth broke through. That's where she found it. A decade-old thread buried in a forgotten subforum. A user with the handle Retired Skunk had posted a grainy scan of what they claimed was a redacted DARPA memo from the early 1950s. It mentioned a short-lived propulsion experiment conducted at a location known only as Site 9, scrapped before public testing. Most of the memo was blacked out except for one phrase. Project Emberlight is to be disbanded. Recovered components are to be buried, sealed, or destroyed. Buried. Like inside a decommissioned cargo plane left to rot in a field no one watched. Kara sat back from her screen and felt the weight of it settle in. This wasn't a coincidence. She wasn't the first person to touch that engine, but she might be the last. She printed the memo and taped it to the shop wall beside the Polaroid from the notebook. Then she took a Sharpie and wrote above both, "Why bury it if it didn't work?" The next morning, she returned to the fuselage. Her boots echoed inside the empty cargo bay, dust dancing in shafts of light. She approached the sealed chamber with a fresh sense of reverence and caution. This wasn't a salvage job anymore. It was an archaeological dig, a forgotten chapter in technological evolution, and maybe human history hiding inside her own backyard. She brought a new flashlight, a non-digital one just in case. The hum was still there, slightly stronger now, like the engine was responding to her presence, remembering her touch. She pulled the canvas off entirely. Up close, the machine had beauty. Brutalist and alien, yes, but undeniably crafted. The tubing was seamless, the welds perfect. Even the bolts looked custom machined. She noticed what looked like a control node, a small port, almost like a keyhole, recessed near the base. Next to it, faintly scratched into the casing, were 2 words. Start sequence. No switch. No panel. Just the mark. She backed away and sat cross-legged in the dark, staring at it for a long time. Start sequence. The phrase pulsed in her head like a metronome. They built something, and they weren't sure what would happen if it started. Kara wasn't ready to start it. Not yet, but she was getting closer to someone who might know what this thing really was. It was time to call in help before someone else realized what she'd found. Kara wasn't the type to ask for help easily. Most of her life she'd solved things alone. Engines, electrical systems, tax forms, grief. But this was different. This wasn't something she could torque or weld her way through. She needed context. She needed history. She needed someone who remembered Project Emberlight. So she started making calls. She reached out to every veteran contact she could find. Military historians, museum archivists, even a retired flight engineer who once taught her how to spot fake rivets on a C-47. Most had never heard of EMBLR. A few gave her vague platitudes. One told her to stop asking questions that get you followed. Then, at 2:17 a.m., her phone lit up. Unknown number. Georgia area code. She let it go to voicemail. But then the same number texted, just 2 words. I saw it. Her pulse jumped. She dialed back instantly. A gruff male voice answered on the second ring. Is this Kara Jensen? It is. This is Robert Mallon. You called about Emberlight. She sat upright in bed. Yes. I think I found one of the test aircraft. Or at least part of it. Silence on the line. Then, describe it. She did. The sealed cargo plane, the hidden bay, the engine, the hum, the notebook. When she mentioned the year 1949, he exhaled sharply. I was a junior analyst at Wright-Patterson. In the 70 seconds, he said. They assigned me to backfile old Cold War projects. Most were nonsense, incomplete, political fluff. But Emberlight. His voice lowered. That one scared people. Even 30 years later. Why? Because it worked. His voice cracked slightly. Whatever that engine is, it wasn't built to move people. It was built to move reality. Kara blinked. What does that mean? He hesitated. You need to be careful. The project was buried for a reason. There are people who still believe it should stay that way. I just want to understand it. Good, he said. Because if you don't, it'll use you instead. So. She went quiet. Robert continued, calmer now. I'll send you what I have. Sketches, notes. Not everything survived, but enough. And Kara? Yeah? If it starts making noise, if it wakes up, don't try to control it. Just listen. It doesn't want to hurt anyone. It wants to finish what it was built for. The line went dead. By morning, she had 5 scanned documents in her inbox. Blueprints. The same engine, half disassembled. Margin notes in tight handwriting. And one old black and white photo, dated 1951, showing a field test. The engine, her engine, was mounted to a reinforced trailer, humming. Trees behind it leaned away, as if pushed by a wind that didn't exist, in red ink across the top. Do not repeat. Site collapse, unstable field. Kara closed the laptop and looked toward the back of the shop, where the fuselage waited in silence. She wasn't alone in this anymore, but she had no idea who else might be watching. By the end of the week, Kara knew someone had been on her property. It started with small things. Her back gate, which she always locked, stood ajar one morning, the padlock still hanging from the chain but unclasped. A set of faint boot prints curved around the side of the hangar, too clean to be hers, too wide to be local. Then, she noticed the plane. Nothing overt, just wrongness. One of the canvas tarps had been shifted, the corner tucked back differently than she left it. And her notepad, the one she used to jot down inventory numbers and sketches, had been moved 2 inches to the right on the workbench. 2 inches was a detail only someone like Kara would catch. That same night, she sat in her darkened kitchen with the lights off and a socket wrench in her lap. Her dog curled at her feet, ears twitching at every sound. The engine inside the plane hadn't changed. The pulse was steady, like the beat of a deep heart sleeping. But outside, the world around her was watching. She installed a trail cam the next morning, hidden in a birdhouse on the back fence, another under the gutter, one inside the cargo bay itself. She didn't expect much, but 3 nights later, the footage proved her right. At 2:43 a.m., a vehicle approached without headlights. Not a car, a matte black SUV, slow and quiet, idling just outside her property line. 2 figures emerged, faces obscured by hoods and infrared goggles. They didn't break in. They didn't speak. They just stood there, watching the plane, watching her house. After 6 minutes, they got back in the SUV and drove off into the dark without leaving a single tire track behind. Kara stared at the footage again and again, fingers numb against the keyboard. Whoever they were, they knew exactly what they were doing. Military, corporate, black budget retrieval crew, or worse, cleaners. The next day, she called. Robert Mallon. "They're here," she said without preamble. "Expected," he replied. "They monitor key phrases in public databases. You triggered something when you searched for the name. What do they want?" "To erase the past," he said softly, "and make sure no one knows what Emberlight really was." Kara clenched her jaw. "Why didn't you warn me?" "I did." The line went quiet for a beat. Then he added, "They won't move yet. Not unless you activate it. Not unless you open the last crate." Kara turned her eyes to the EB-71 container, still sealed in its steel cradle. The warning stenciled in block letters across the lid. "Do not open in field conditions." She ended the call and stared at it for a long time. Someone was coming. Maybe not tonight. Maybe not for a week. But the clock was ticking now. If she was going to learn the truth, she had to move first. The answers weren't in the notebook anymore. They were inside the crate. Kara waited until well after midnight. The wind had died down. No dogs barked. No cars passed. Even the hum from the distant substation had faded into a stillness so complete it felt staged, as if the world were holding its breath. She wheeled the EB-71 crate into the main bay under the overhead lights. It moved heavier than it should have, the kind of weight that didn't just come from mass but from meaning. She'd studied it for days, memorized its dimensions, measured the resonance hum that subtly echoed off its steel. But tonight, she didn't take notes. Tonight, she opened it. 2 titanium clamps sealed the lid, locked with a rusted twist mechanism that fought her all the way. When they finally gave with a reluctant crack, the crate hissed not violently, just a soft exhale, like something inside had equalized after decades of silence. She peeled the lid back. Inside, foam padding wrapped in silvered fabric cradled a single object, a cylindrical device about the size of a rifle case, etched with complex grooves and magnetic ridges. It looked inert, cold, but it vibrated ever so slightly like it was shivering. On the bottom of the crate lay a sealed envelope, water-stained but intact. She picked it up and read the front. To be opened only if recovered. Beneath that, Dr. Marcus D. Hellersight, 9 Director. Kara's pulse jumped. MDH. The same initials from the notebook. She tore the envelope open with shaking fingers and unfolded a single typed page. "If you're reading this, the containment protocol has failed. The device you've uncovered is not propulsion, not in the way we understand it. It is reactive, adaptive, and potentially sentient. It does not store energy. It loops it, consumes entropy, feeds on imbalance. That is why it stabilizes environments and destabilizes minds. We believed we were building an engine. What we created was a mirror, not of matter but of memory. Be warned, the more time you spend in proximity, the more it learns from you. It will not speak, but it will echo. And if it recognizes you, it may try to complete what we never could." At the bottom, scrawled in pen, "Do not attempt a start sequence alone. It needs a second signature. 2 minds. 1 memory. 1 to remember. 1 to forget." Kara lowered the page, heart pounding. The device inside the crate, whatever it was part of the engine. Not an accessory, not a fuel source, a catalyst. And if she was reading Heller right, it didn't just respond to memory, it used it. She turned back to the fuselage. The hum was louder now, no longer faint, no longer patient. She placed her hand on the crate's edge and whispered, "You've been waiting for someone." And somewhere, deep inside the sealed chamber, the engine answered with a soft rising whine. By morning, Kara had moved every crate into the main bay and cleared a wide work table to spread the evidence out like a detective chasing ghosts. The sealed device, the catalyst, sat at the center, still inert but undeniably present, like a new gravity had settled into her shop. Everything orbited it now. Her thoughts, her fears, and the fragments of a project the world tried to forget. She unboxed the remaining folders from the larger crate labeled EMBLR Support, expecting old repair manuals or fuel logs. But what she found stunned her. Blueprints, not paper ones, not blue at all, but translucent data sheets printed on polymer with heat-reactive ink, still legible after decades. They flickered faintly under LED light, revealing layered schematics, circuit clusters, and something even stranger: notations in a cipher. The language wasn't military code or engineering shorthand. It was more like symbolic compression, condensed shapes that expanded when exposed to UV, revealing spirals of embedded microtext. Whoever wrote this had been years ahead of any known documentation protocol. She tried scanning them, but her laptop sputtered and crashed every time she hovered near the catalyst. Eventually, she gave up and did what she always did best: figured it out by hand. Piece by piece, she began to understand. The engine wasn't just mechanical. It had neural architecture, a framework of adaptive circuits wrapped in feedback loops. The catalyst was designed to interface with the user, not through a keyboard, but through memory, thought, and possibly even emotion. It wasn't built to run with commands. It was built to run with connection. She flipped one blueprint over and saw something that made her breath catch: a diagram titled Mind divided by Mirror Coherence, revealed a side-by-side illustration of two neural patterns, overlapping like ripples in water. One labeled Initiator, the other Reflector. Two minds, one memory. Heller's final warning echoed in her skull: one to remember, one to forget. This wasn't just a machine, it was a bridge, and it needed two people to cross it. One to ground the device, one to awaken it. Kara leaned back, stunned. Was this what they'd been building in 1949? Not a propulsion engine, but a cognitive drive? Something that could extract a human memory, interpret it as an energy pattern, and translate it into movement, not through space, but through possibility? No wonder they shut it down, and no wonder they buried it inside a plane never meant to fly again. Suddenly, her trail cam alert pinged. She grabbed her phone. This time, the figure wasn't at the edge of the property. He was inside the fence, wearing a long coat, silver hair, and a satchel slung over one shoulder. She recognized him instantly from the old Polaroid taped to her wall. Dr. Marcus D. Heller had not died in 1954, like the reports claimed. He had just stepped back into her life and into the light of his unfinished creation. He stood just beyond the plane, framed by the morning haze like something out of a forgotten photograph. Same sharp jawline, same heavy brow. From the Polaroid Kara had stared at for nights, only now weathered by decades of survival. Dr. Marcus D. Heller was supposed to be a ghost, and yet he raised a hand like he'd been expected. Kara didn't hesitate. She stepped out of the shop slowly, keeping her body between him and the open cargo door. "You're real," she said quietly. His voice was gravel and caution. "So is the machine." She motioned toward the satchel slung over his shoulder. "What's in the bag?" He smirked faintly. "Insurance. And answers. I assume you've opened the crate." She nodded once. He exhaled like he'd been holding that breath for 30 years. "Then you don't have much time." They sat in the cargo bay, him cross-legged on an old drop cloth, her still on edge, a pry bar resting across her knees. He explained everything in slow, careful pieces. He hadn't died in 1954. That report was fabricated by the same agency that buried the plane. After Project Emberlight's final test went sideways, what he called a containment phase collapse, the program was dismantled, not decommissioned. Too much promise, too much fear. So they didn't shut it down. They hid it. "Why a plane?" Kara asked. "Mobility," Heller answered. "If containment failed, it could be moved, disappear in minutes. But it never came to that. The test failed before they could weaponize it." He reached into the satchel and pulled out a folder labeled Reclamation Rights, stamped with a seal Kara didn't recognize. There are still people who believe the device should be completed. That it can be retooled. Kara stared at the folder. You mean militarized? He didn't answer directly. 2 days ago, she said. Men showed up. Black SUV. Infrared goggles. Watched the place. Didn't come in. Heller's expression darkened. Then they know. Who are they? Not government, he said. At least not officially. Think private enforcement black budget. Funded by the parts of the defense sector that never get their names on buildings. They don't want the story. They want the engine. Kara tightened her grip on the pry bar. So what happens if they take it? Heller looked straight at her. Then the world doesn't get to decide what comes next. They do. She swallowed hard. He leaned forward. But they won't move until they're certain it's active. Until the field registers a cognitive link. Kara's mind reeled. The memory bridge, he nodded. And they need you for that. Why me? Heller gave a half smile, soft and sad. Because the engine chose you. And I think I know why. Before she could ask what he meant, his face fell. From outside, tires crunched over gravel. They both turned toward the open cargo door, as a black SUV rolled into view this time, not stopping at the gate. This time, coming straight for them. Kara didn't wait. The second the SUV crept past the fence line, she yanked the cargo bay shut with a metallic slam and slid the locking rod into place. Heller didn't flinch. He calmly stood, slung the satchel over his shoulder, and turned toward the sealed chamber. They'll be inside in 2 minutes, he said. Then tell me what to do. The device is already listening, he said. But it's dormant. To activate the cognitive field, we need simultaneous input. 2 signatures. 1 link. He motioned to the catalyst. It's not just a trigger. It's a translator. Think of it like a conductor in a symphony. It takes memory and harmonizes it. Kara stared at the machine. What if I don't have the right memory? You do, he said without hesitation. You wouldn't be here otherwise. A pounding thud echoed from the far side of the plane. They were trying to force the side panel open. Heller pulled a compact metal device from his satchel, a curved plate covered in threads of copper and crystal. This is the bridge key, he said. You place your hand here. I place mine on the engine. The system will sync. He looked her in the eye. It will scan you. It will find the memory it needs. Kara's hand hovered over the plate. What does it do once it finds it? His voice lowered. It shows you the truth. She pressed her palm flat. At once the device glowed, not with heat, but with recognition. Heller turned and touched the central chamber of the engine. The air in the fuselage shifted, thickened, shimmered. The walls groaned, not from strain, but from tension, like pressure inside a sealed bottle ready to pop. The hum grew sharper, tonal, musical. Then something happened Kara couldn't explain. Her memories began to rise, not in images, but in sensation. The feel of her father's hand guiding hers on a wrench. The sound of a flooded engine turning over for the first time. The ache of being left. The warmth of discovery. All of it layered, woven, vibrating like chords strummed by unseen fingers. Her eyes flooded with tears. Not pain, not fear. Recognition. Heller whispered. You're sinking. A sudden pulse rippled through the air, whump like a heartbeat dropped into water. The walls shimmered. Static crackled at the edges of her vision. The engine began to breathe. Panels on its sides unfolded like petals, revealing a core that shimmered with depth like looking into the night sky through a keyhole. Patterns danced within it, not language, but memory in motion. Kara felt something deep in her spine shift. And then, outside, a voice shouted, "Hands in the air! Now!" Too late. The engine woke. It didn't explode. It didn't burn. It opened. Light burst through the seams of the fuselage, not white, but a spectrum beyond color, like emotion made visible. And in that instant, time hesitated. Kara stood at the edge of something bigger than propulsion, bigger than history. It was working, and it knew her. The blast of light didn't destroy the plane. It revealed it. Every rivet, every weld, every surface of the old cargo bay seemed to hum with newfound clarity, not cleaner, but more alive. The EMBLR engine sat fully activated, its petals open like a blooming metallic flower, pulsing in tune with something beyond mechanical rhythm. Kara stood beside it, breathless, her skin prickling with a charge she couldn't name. Outside, the shouting had stopped. The SUV's doors had flung open mid-burst, the figures frozen in place as if stunned by something they couldn't comprehend. Kara could just make them out through the small fuselage window. 3 agents, fully armed, blinking like deer caught in an alien sunrise. And then, as if the moment bent inward, the engine spoke not in words, not even in sound, but in a feeling. Transmit. It wasn't a command. It was an offering. Kara turned toward Heller, his hand still resting on the core. "You said it was memory-based," she said, voice trembling. "So what happens now?" He looked at her, and in his eyes, she saw both fear and faith. "Now we let the world see what they tried to bury." He reached into his satchel and pulled out a small object, a drive, shielded in lead casing. "All the data," he said. "The blueprints, the original research, my logs. I've carried this for 60 years. Kara took it without a word. They moved together, him leading the way. Kara carrying the drive and the blueprint scans. They didn't run. They didn't hide. When the cargo door creaked open again, the men outside didn't raise their weapons. They just stared at her, at the light, at the truth they could no longer contain. Kara walked past them like they weren't there. One of them, the youngest, took a step forward, then stopped, unsure whether to stop her or follow her. She didn't look back. By the time she reached her shop, the engine's hum had stabilized. The cargo bay behind her still glowed faintly, like a lantern hanging between dimensions. Heller stayed inside, watching, guarding a man return to his life's purpose, no longer hiding. Kara uploaded the files to 6 locations: an encrypted public server, a military archive mirror, 3 cloud drives, and a secured whistleblower portal. Then she added something else, a video. It showed the engine waking. It showed the light. It showed her face stunned, awed, transformed, as she touched a machine built not just to fly but to understand. She didn't include her name. She didn't need to. Within 24 hours, the footage had spread across the globe. Defense analysts scrambled to verify. Scientists debated authenticity. Conspiracy forums exploded. But the truth was out. The past was no longer buried. And Kara Jensen, the girl who once fixed rusted boats and dead cars, had just cracked open a secret bigger than propulsion. She had given the future a memory, and the memory had answered back. Kara didn't sleep that night. Her inbox overflowed with messages, scientists, journalists, shadow accounts with IPs traced to defense contractors and classified labs. Some offered praise, others made veiled threats. But none of them mattered as much as the single envelope waiting on her workbench the next morning. It was from her grandfather. She'd never known him. He disappeared when her father was just a boy presumed dead, listed as MIA from an undisclosed operation in 1951. But inside the envelope, yellowed and sealed in wax, was a photo of the EMBLR engine in its earliest prototype phase, and standing beside it was a younger version of him, smiling. Behind the photo was a short letter, dated June 1950. "If you ever find this, it means the engine lived, and so did our dream. This wasn't just about flight, it was about breaking the boundary between what we build and what we feel. They told us to bury it. But I hoped one day, someone with our blood and our stubbornness would bring it back." Tears welled in Kara's eyes. The memory bridge, it had responded to her because it recognized her. Not just her thoughts, her lineage. She wasn't just the mechanic who stumbled onto something forbidden. She was part of it, part of the reason it worked. Back in the hangar, Heller stood silently near the engine. The hum was quieter now, more rhythmic. Kara approached, holding the photo tight in one hand, and whispered, "I think it's ready." Heller didn't speak. He simply nodded once, The EMBLR core shimmered faintly. It wasn't asking to be used. It was inviting her to become something more. Kara stood at the center of the fuselage, one hand resting on the core, the other still clutching her grandfather's letter. Outside, the world was erupting, scientists debating, governments scrambling, people watching. But in here, inside the humming belly of a once-forgotten aircraft, everything was quiet. Ready. The EMBLR engine pulsed gently beneath her fingertips. It wasn't just a machine anymore. It was a message crafted from legacy, loss, and light. A fusion of memory and purpose, waiting for someone not to control it, but to trust it. Heller handed her a headset analog, old school, patched together from Cold War salvage. "You're not piloting it," he said. "You're witnessing it." "What happens if it works?" Kara asked. He smiled faintly. "Then history rewrites itself, starting with you." She took a breath, deep and steady, and nodded. The chamber lights dimmed. The engine swelled with color. The pedals that once looked metallic now shimmered like liquid glass, stretching outward with soundless grace. The cargo bay began to vibrate, not shaking but shifting, like the world outside was being unhooked from gravity, from time. And then, it lifted. No roar, no blast, just silence. And motion. Kara felt herself rising, the plane rising, the idea of it lifting, as if the EMBLR engine was no longer concerned with physics, but with possibility. Through the open bay window, the sky bent, not toward space, but toward memory. And then, for a moment, it flew, not with wings, not with thrust, but with belief. Later, no one could explain what they saw, not even Heller. The plane returned to the Earth hours later, intact but changed. And Kara? She stepped out smiling, because she hadn't just rebuilt a forgotten engine. She had become its purpose.